Snow was falling so hard, it made the red rock vanish. So Yazi tugged his blanket higher across his shoulders, hunching into the wind that whipped like claws over the high desert. His horse ribs, sharp under a shaggy winter coat, moved with caution through the drifted path. The storm had come fast. 1 hour ago, the sun still lit the mesa tops in gold. Now it was all white silence and blurred shapes like the world itself was hiding. He shouldn't have come this way. He knew better. There were safer trails along the canyon wall, even if they added days. But something had pulled him north, a feeling he hadn't trusted in years, like a rope around the ribs, tugging him back toward places that still had ghosts. And then he saw them. 2 small figures by a broken fence, standing still in the wind. Too still. One of them was holding onto the post with both hands like she might blow away without it. The other, smaller, had her arms around her body and her eyes fixed on him with something that looked like hunger and something worse, something like knowing. He reined in. At first they didn't move, just stared. The wind screamed between them. Then the older one stepped forward. She was maybe 7, face sharp from hunger, brown eyes too big for the rest of her. Her fingers were bare and blue at the edges. She didn't ask if he was lost or if he'd come from the fort. She walked right up to his stirrup, reached up with trembling hands and gripped his boot like it was the last warm thing in the world. "Please, mister," she whispered. "Be our father. Just for today." So looked down at her hand. Dirt under the nails, purple along the knuckles. The grip was strong, though. She wasn't begging. She was holding on. Behind her, the smaller one stayed by the fence, eyes shining but dry. She hadn't said a word. Didn't need to. Her stare felt like judgment, old and quiet. Cho cleared his throat, voice rusty from days without use. "Where's your family?" The older girl didn't answer right away. Her eyes darted toward the small house near the edge of the juniper trees, a hogan well-built but sagging under snow. Smoke curled thin from the chimney. Not enough. "Mama's sick," she said finally. "Said to wait at the fence till she called, but she ain't called. How long you been standing out here?" The younger one held up both hands, all 10 fingers spread, then folded 2 down. 8 hours, he asked, incredulous. She nodded. So dismounted before he could stop himself. His legs ached from the cold and the ride, but he barely felt it. He knelt beside the girl, brushing snow from her sleeves. "What's your name, Sani?" "And her Ahyoka. She don't talk much." Ahyoka tilted her head slightly, still watching, still silent. So took a breath that burned his lungs. "You've got to go inside." "We can't," Sani said. "Mama said wait. Well, I say go." Sani's eyes narrowed almost to glare. Mama said wait for the one she saw, the one with the sad eyes. That hit harder than it should have. So stood up fast. "I ain't the one." Ahyoka spoke then, soft as the snow. "You are." He turned away, walking toward the house. This was a mistake. He should have ridden on. Let the storm take its course, let these girls be someone else's problem. He'd buried enough children in his time, and they hadn't even been his. But when he pushed open the door to the hogan, he stopped short. The warmth hit him first, not from the fire but from the smell. Cornmeal and cedar and something beneath it. Fever. Death. He knew that scent from the war, from tents filled with coughing men and prayers that never worked. The woman on the bed was covered in thick blankets. Her hair was damp with sweat skin, pale, except for 2 angry red spots on her cheeks. She opened her eyes at the sound of his boots, and they locked onto his face with a strength that didn't belong in someone that sick. "Who are you?" she rasped. "So Yazi," he said. Your girls were freezing outside. I told them she tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. They waited 8 hours, he said flatly. They would have died if I hadn't come. Her breathing hitched. You need to leave. I don't know you. My girls don't need strange men in their home. No, he agreed. They need heat and food, and someone to make sure they don't get taken by the same bastards who left you like this. Her eyes narrowed. Cutter sent you, no, but I've heard his name. Silence. The girls crept in behind him. Sani ran to her mother's side. Ahyoka stood in the doorway, eyes still scanning Tso's face like she was seeing something she couldn't quite explain. I don't want help, the woman said. We don't need saving. You're not getting a choice, Tso said. She looked like she wanted to argue, but then she coughed hard. The kind of cough that shook a body down to the bone. Blood dotted the cloth she pressed to her mouth. Tso stepped back, heart-twisting. He'd seen this before. Pneumonia may be worse. Where's your husband? He asked. Sani's head bowed. Gone. 18 moons now. Ahyoka finally crossed the room. She climbed onto the bed, curled into her mother's side. Nalina, he didn't know her name yet, but she looked like a Nalena, rested her hand on the girl's hair. You should go, she said quietly. They're coming back. If they see you here, I'm not afraid of men like Cutter, Tso said. I've met worse. No, she said. You haven't. He didn't answer. He walked to the hearth, threw on 2 more logs. The flames crackled, unsure, then caught. The room glowed a little brighter. Then he saw it. A stone at the base of the fireplace, darker than the rest, slightly ajar. He crouched, fingers tracing the edge. You don't want to do that, she said behind him. He pulled the stone free. Inside, a wrapped bundle, a journal leather-bound and worn at the edges. Tso opened it, and the first line made his hands go still. If I die before this reaches the right eyes, let this be proof of what Ambrose Cutter has done. He looked back at her. She closed her eyes, not from shame but from exhaustion. I told him not to keep that thing, she whispered. Tso turned the page. The fire popped behind him, and outside the wind carried the echo of hooves across the snow. God didn't send you. My daughter's fever did. But either way, you're here now, and that makes you dangerous. Nalina Nez's voice cracked as she spoke, low and dry, like stone dragged across sandstone. Her lips were pale and split a trace of dried blood at the corner. She lay against a stack of blankets near the hearth, her back supported by a faded pillow stitched with stars and feathers. Ahyoka clung to her mother's side, her small hand resting on Nalina's forearm like a thread keeping her tethered to this world. Tso didn't answer right away. He was still holding the leather journal, one hand curled around its edge, the other turning pages slowly, each line more damning than the last. Chuli Nez had been meticulous. Dates, names, supplier records, payment trails. Cutter's fraud wasn't small time. This was territory-wide, churches, schools, even government buildings. And the Nez family's land sat on something valuable enough to kill for. He looked up. He wrote this to protect you. No, Nalina said, closing her eyes. He wrote it to damn them. He was always trying to do the right thing, even when it got him killed. Tso lowered himself to the floor, cross-legged near the hearth. The girls had gone quiet. Sani was curled on a pallet of worn quilts, trying to act like she wasn't listening. Ahyoka hadn't moved from her place at Nalina's side. The fire threw long shadows across the curved walls. Outside, the wind still blew but softer now, as if the storm were catching its breath. What happened to him? Tso asked. Nalina didn't open her eyes. He was working on the new church in Fort Defiance. Cutter supplied the lumber, cheap pine full of knots, brittle and dry. Chuli said the beams wouldn't last through spring. He went to the territorial inspector, said he had proof, said people would die if the building collapsed. She paused, coughing hard. So passed her the tin cup by the bed, lukewarm now but still wet. She took 2 sips, then rested again. He never made it to the inspector, she went on. They said he fell 20 feet off a scaffold onto the stone floor. Broke his back, cracked his skull. Called it an accident. Said he was drunk. Her jaw tensed. Chuli never drank. Not once in 10 years. He watched his father beat his mother bloody, and he swore off it before he had his first whisker. But Cutter made sure the bottle was there. And the witnesses. Men who owed him. So closed the journal and set it on the floor. You knew I knew he was dead before they even told me. Her voice went flat. A man like Cutter doesn't make threats. He makes examples. Why stay, he asked. Nalina opened her eyes, then sharp and dark. Because this is my home. Because my husband built every stone in this hogan with his own hands. Because my girls learned to walk on this dirt, not Cutter's. And because I won't let him take what little I have left. Her chest hitched as she breathed. She gritted her teeth and forced herself upright. Tizo moved to help, but she waved him off. I'm not broken yet, Yazzie. He nodded, saying nothing. You're not here to save us, she said after a beat. You should know that. Whatever guilt you're dragging behind you, it's not ours to carry. I know, he said quietly. Then why are you still here? He didn't have a clean answer. He thought about riding away more than once that day, especially when he saw the girls out in the snow. But something in him had gone still the moment Sani grabbed his boot, and Ioka said, You are. He used to believe in signs. Before war. Before graves. So looked into the fire. Because someone needs to be. Nalina studied him like she was trying to decide whether that was a good thing or a mistake. After a moment, she said, She dreams things sometimes. Ioka. So glanced at the girl who was watching the flames flicker, face unreadable. She dreamed about you, Nalina added. 2 nights ago. A man with eyes full of ghosts riding a dark horse coming through the storm. She say what I'd do, no, Nalina said. But she said you'd stay. He almost laughed. Kid's got more faith than I do. She doesn't believe. She knows. That's worse. The fire popped. Sani stirred on the blankets and murmured something in her sleep. Ahyoka finally spoke. Mama said the medicine man wouldn't come. So turned toward her. Did she? Ahyoka nodded once. But I saw him. You brought fire in your hands. So looked at his fingers. Just calluses, scars, dirt. Nothing special. Still, the way she said it made something crawl along his spine. I don't know about fire, he said, but I can get medicine. From town. Fort Defiance still has a clinic, doesn't it? Nalina didn't answer. A doctor, he asked. She gave a short nod. Elias Redbird. Mixed blood. Knows his work. Charges more for Navajo than he does for white men. I've got coin, so said. Not much, but enough for medicine. She looked at him again. This time something behind her eyes softened. Not trust, but the edge of it. Weariness, maybe. You'll need to leave before first light, she said. Roads get watched. I know. And you'll need to come back. Fast. I will. Sani opened her eyes and sat up. Mama, I'm fine, baby. Nalina said gently, wincing as she laid back down. So stood and picked up his coat from the chair. The journal was already tucked into his saddlebag. He slung it over his shoulder. I'll be back before nightfall. Sani's eyes were wide. Promise. He hesitated. I don't make promises, but you'll come back. He looked between the girls and their mother, the bare walls, the old quilts, the fire that was already burning low. "Yes," he said. "I'll come back." He stepped outside. The wind had calmed, but the snow was still deep. His horse stood under a juniper mane crusted with ice eyes half-lidded. Tizo swung up into the saddle reins cold in his hands. Behind him, the Hogan door creaked shut. He rode east toward the ridge that would carry him down into the basin toward Fort Defiance, and a man who might still believe in medicine more than silence. As he disappeared into the white Ayoka stood at the window, her fingers against the glass. Her breath fogged the pain. "He's going to find it," she whispered. Nalina stirred. "Find what, baby?" But Ayoka didn't answer. She only stared into the snow where the man with fire in his hands had gone. "My husband didn't fall. He was pushed because of what's in that journal you're holding." So Yazi sat by the fire as the snow piled higher outside. The Hogan walls creaked under the weight wind whining through the seams in the roof. The girls were asleep now, curled together under a worn buffalo robe near the back corner. Nalina watched them from her cot, her face pale, but her voice iron. She nodded toward the open book in Tuo's lap. That's what got him killed. He didn't argue. He'd been reading it for the last hour, and his gut told him she was right. The leather journal had been hidden behind the hearthstone, kept close, as if Chuli Nez had known someone would come looking for it. The entries weren't just notes. They were a map of the rot running through Fort Defiance. Chuli had documented everything: lumber orders marked as premium but delivered warped and brittle, bills signed off by non-existent inspectors, wages withheld from Navajo laborers with no explanation. The worst was buried deeper: land deeds quietly transferred to Cutter's associates, with forged signatures and illegal surveys, all pointing to a single goal: control of tribal lands by any means necessary, including murder. "He said it would protect us," Nalina said. "Said as long as I kept it hidden, Cutter couldn't touch us." But he was wrong. So flipped the page. A list of names. Not just Cutter, but 2 bank managers, the church's head builder, a district clerk. And under one, in Chuli's tight script, Sheriff Hale. Paid in cash, untraceable. 2 meetings documented. Will confirm with Redbird. Redbird knew, so asked. Nalina nodded slowly. He suspected. Chuli talked to him once, but it was dangerous. Elias has people to protect. He wasn't going to stick his neck out. And now she looked at him, her gaze steady. Now he might, if you ask the right way. So closed the book, wrapped it back in cloth, and slid it into his saddlebag by the door. He felt heavy, like he'd swallowed the snowstorm outside. The truth was worse than he expected, and more dangerous. Cutter hadn't just silenced a builder. He'd been covering a criminal enterprise with roots deep enough to strangle half the territory. "Did you tell anyone else?" he asked. No one. Nalina coughed, her shoulders trembling. "I'm not stupid. Someone knows you have it," he said, "or suspects." She didn't argue. He stood and moved to the door. The wind outside had quieted, but the sky was still the color of ash. He needed to leave soon, make it to town and back before nightfall. But his mind was still tangled with what he'd read. "What did he say, your husband?" he asked suddenly. Nalina looked over, confused. Before he hit it. Before he died. Her eyes dropped to the girls, both still asleep, their faces soft in the firelight. She was quiet a moment, then said, "He said there were things worth dying for, but he hoped I wouldn't have to be one of them." So didn't know what to say to that. He adjusted the satchel over his shoulder and stepped into his boots. Nalina cleared her throat. "So." He turned. "If they come back while you're gone?" "They won't," he said. "You can't know that. I can." She didn't press, but he saw the fear in her. Not just for herself, for her daughters. for what might come with a knock on the door. "I'll be back before night," he said. And then he left. The trail into town was icy and half-covered, but his horse Hope knew the terrain. She picked her way along the ridge, carefully head low against the cold. Tiso kept his eyes on the horizon. The trail curved toward a rise, and once he crossed it, Fort Defiance would come into view. He kept the satchel tight against his side. If he was stopped, he needed to be ready to lie or draw. But no one was watching this time. The town looked the same as it had the last time he rode through a few stone buildings, the church still under construction, and the brick monstrosity of the bank at the center of it all, like a cancerous heart. Tiso tied Hope near the back of the trading post and walked to the clinic. It was a squat wooden building with a flat roof and a single cracked window. The front door creaked as he entered. The air smelled of herbs and alcohol and something faintly bitter. A Navajo boy, maybe 12, looked up from where he was sweeping. "Doctor's back room," the boy said, "but he don't like visitors." So nodded and moved past him. Dr. Elias Redbird was hunched over a desk covered in ledgers and dried herbs. His sleeves were rolled and his eyes were red around the edges. He didn't look up. "Unless you're bleeding, dying, or paying," he said, "come back later. I'm here for Nalina Nez." Redbird froze. Slowly he looked up. "Is she still breathing?" So said, "but not for long without medicine." Redbird stood and crossed the room in 2 strides. He pulled open a cabinet and began packing a cloth bag with bottles and wrapped paper bundles. "She has that cough again, worse." He nodded, working fast. "Laudanum quinine and willow bark. Heat this before giving it to her. Twice a day. And the girl's hungry, cold, holding on." Redbird stopped and met So's eyes. "Why are you with them? I found the girls in the snow. They pulled me in." The doctor didn't respond, just handed over the bag. "I need to ask you something else," So said. "I figured." He pulled the wrapped journal from the satchel and opened it to the marked page. Redbird took one glance and paled. "You know these names?" So asked. "Too many," the doctor said quietly. "You were going to confirm what Chuli found." Redbird closed his eyes. "That was a long time ago." "It's not done." "No," the doctor said, voice low. "But I am. You don't understand what Cutter is. I'm learning fast." Redbird exhaled hard, rubbing a hand over his face. "You should burn that book. Take the girls and go. There's no law in this town that doesn't answer to Cutter." "I'm not looking for the law," So said. "I'm looking for justice. That's the same thing when you're lucky. And suicide when you're not. I'll take my chances." The doctor stared at him. White So turned toward the door. "Because I'm tired of watching men like Chuli die for nothing." Redbird didn't stop him. As he stepped into the cold again, the sun was already lowering behind the ridgeline. The sky burned with a deep gold. He swung into the saddle and rode west, the medicine safe in his coat, and the journal heavier than anything he'd ever carried. The snow had started again by the time he crested the ridge. Down below, the Hogan sat quiet. Too quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney, but the door was cracked open. No movement inside, no sounds. His stomach dropped. He kicked Hope into a gallop, drawing his rifle in one hand as they tore down the path. Something had happened. And it wasn't over. "You're just a drifter, Yazzie. Walk away. This family ain't worth dying for." The man who said it sat tall in his saddle, a long-barreled rifle resting across the pommel-gloved hands, steady. 2 others flanked him, one with a scar running from ear to chin, the other chewing on a toothpick, like he had all the time in the world. Their horses shifted restlessly in the snow-packed yard, breath steaming in the air. None of them had hats on, just dusters and cold eyes. So sat motionless on the Hogan's front steps, the rifle across his knees, coat dusted in snow. He'd made it back just in time. When he'd crested the ridge, he'd seen their tracks. 3 horses moving slow, deliberate. They hadn't knocked, just waited outside, watching the smoke rise. He'd entered through the back-handed Nalina the medicine and told the girls to stay out of sight. Now he sat alone, facing the men Cutter had sent. Morning Tso said calmly, "Little late for charity, don't you think?" The scarred man smiled. "We heard the Nez woman had some company. Just came to say hello. You're saying it with rifles. Only way people listen nowadays." Tso adjusted the weight of his rifle slightly. "Well, I'm listening. Go on." The first man, older gray-streaked hair under his collar, leaned forward. Cutter's made it clear. The woman squatting on land that ain't hers. Church deed says it belongs to the parish now. Church hasn't built anything here. Yet. That's what the land's for. Progress preacher says. Clean ground for holy work. So almost laughed. Funny kind of holy work. The man's jaw tightened. We're just delivering a message. Tell her to pack up and leave. She's got 3 days, and if she doesn't... The man shifted his grip on the reins. Things get rough. So met his eyes. Rough's already here. That made the third man laugh. You gonna stand between us and a preacher's land claim, stranger? Looks that way. The man with the toothpick spat into the snow. You know how this ends. Maybe Tso said. But I'll decide when it does. A long silence stretched between them. The wind kicked up flakes between hooves and boots. The horses shifted again. You don't even know these people, the first man said, voice quieter now. You're just a drifter, Yazzie. Walk away. This family ain't worth dying for. Tso stood slowly, rifle still in hand. Then why are you here? The man hesitated. If they weren't worth something, Tso went on, you wouldn't be risking this kind of mess in broad daylight. Wouldn't send 3 armed men for a dying woman and 2 little girls. So let's not pretend this is about righteousness. The scarred man muttered something under his breath. The leader raised a hand to stop him. We'll pass along the warning, he said. 3 days. After that, we won't be talking. He turned his horse with a sharp yank, and the other 2 followed without a word. Snow crunched under hooves as they disappeared down the slope into the trees. Tso didn't lower his rifle until they were gone. Behind him, the door creaked open. Nalina leaned against the frame, her face pale, one hand pressed to her ribs. You shouldn't have done that. I didn't do anything yet. They'll be back. With more men? With Sheriff Hale, maybe. He nodded. I'm counting on it. She narrowed her eyes. That's a bad plan. Most of mine are, he said, stepping inside. The warmth hit him first, weak but better than the outside. The fire had burned low, but the girls had kept it alive. Sani sat beside the hearth, sorting small sticks into bundles, her hands moving quickly, silently. Ayoka sat by her sketching something in the soot with a bit of charred wood. Tso couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a shape with 7 lines radiating out. 7, he asked her. Ayoka didn't look up. When the moon is high. He glanced at Nalina. She had the same expression he'd seen in field surgeons during the war, tired, resigned, already counting the dead. I need to go to town again, he said, before they do. For what proof, he said, and help. There's no help in Fort Defiance. They're Cutter's people. The law is his. The sheriff is his. The church is his. Not everyone, Tso said. Not Marta, the shopkeeper. She's quiet, but she sees everything. She sells grain and tobacco. She also keeps Cutter's ledgers, Tso said. And she knew Chuli. That made her pause. And Redbird, Tso added. He's scared, but he knows what Cutter's done. If we give him a reason to speak, maybe he will. maybe Nalina said. But reason won't stop bullets. No, he agreed. But it might bring more guns. She gave him a long look. This isn't your fight. I think it is now. Sani looked up from her bundle. You're staying for now. Ayoka didn't speak, just kept drawing. Nalina moved slowly to the fire sat beside her daughters. We'll need more wood. If this storm holds, we won't last through the week. I'll take care of it, So said. Benali's forge is on the edge of town. I'll stop there too. Nalina arched an eyebrow. That old coyote still alive, meaner than ever, So said. Good. Cutter never liked him either. So rolled his shoulders, felt the weight of what he was walking into settle along his spine like old bones clicking into place. He picked up the saddlebag, checked the journal, tucked it deep under the blanket lining. Then he pulled his coat on, adjusted the rifle on his back, and stepped outside again. Snow had slowed, but the clouds were heavy, thick with more. He moved toward the small corral and split woodpile, checking the perimeter out of habit. The fence was intact. No new tracks. Still, the air had shifted. He knelt near the horses, patting Hope's flank. One more run, he murmured. Then maybe we get to breathe. From the ridge above the trees, he could just make out the trail into town. He mounted, took one last look at the Hogan, and rode east. He didn't notice the figure watching him from the rock outcrop above, wrapped in a gray cloak rifle across their knees. But the watcher noticed everything, including the saddlebag, and the way So Yazi looked when he thought he was alone. 7 men, when the moon is high, with fire and hate in their hands. Ayoka said it quiet, like it wasn't hers to speak, but someone else's memory passing through her. She sat on the floor near the hearth, drawing in the dirt, with her finger a wide circle that she marked with 7 evenly spaced notches. Her sister watched from the cot, eyes tired but sharp, while Nalina coughed into a cloth that came away with red. So stood by the window, watching the last of the light bleed out across the distant mesa. The sky had cleared after days of snow, and the night promised to be sharp and still. Too clear. Moon would be full by midnight, casting silver across every tree, every roof, every set of tracks. He didn't need Ahyoka's dreams to tell him what was coming. They'll wait for the dark, he said. So no one sees what they're doing. They won't wait long, Nalina said. That visit earlier was a test. So nodded. They'll want to finish this before anyone stirs in town. Will you run? Sani asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. So turned. No, you could, she said. They don't know the mountains like we do. We could hide. He didn't answer right away. The weight of the saddlebag was still on his back from town. He'd spent the morning gathering supplies, nails, lamp oil, a few bullets, food from Marta's shop. She'd given him a look when he walked in, the kind that said you're not walking back out the same way, and still slid a tin of hardtack across the counter without asking questions. He'd seen that kind of look before. During his worst days as a scout, when men fought not because they believed in anything, but because they had no other direction left to fall. No hiding, he said finally. If we run, we stay running. And I'm tired of running. Ayoka didn't look up. They'll bring fire. I know. He started moving through the cabin, checking each window, each gap in the wall. He stuffed rags in the larger cracks and poured sand over the floor near the door in case of oil. Then he showed Sani how to reload cartridges. Her hands shook at first, but she caught on fast, same way her father probably taught her to shell corn or snare rabbits. Nalina, too, weak to stand for long, still insisted on preparing the oil lamps. If they cut the firewood or smoke us out, we'll need light. So offered to help, but she waved him off. I'm not dead yet. Outside, the wind shifted again, blowing from the west. The forest was still too still, Not even the usual crackle of night creatures. They knew what men didn't, that silence often came before pain. He went to the barn next, patting Hope's flank and checking the harnesses. Cutter's men would likely burn the barn, first take away the horse, the winter supplies, the tools. That's how raiders worked: starve the family, gut their future, and then finish the job under a moral name. He didn't plan on letting that happen. Back inside, he slid the journal onto the table. Nalina glanced at it as she sipped hot broth. "You still think that book matters? It matters to the right people," he said. "The marshal in Santa Fe, maybe. He's not bought. He's far away. Not forever." She didn't argue. So looked down at the girls. "You both need to be quiet and fast. When I say move, you move. If I don't say anything at all, you go." Sani nodded. Ayoka didn't speak, but her drawing was done now, 7 dark lines pointing inward to a single blackened dot. "What's that in the middle?" Tiso asked her. She met his eyes. "You." Nalina coughed again, harsher this time, and gripped the edge of the cot. So helped her lean back, handed her the cloth, and pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Her skin burned, her breathing shallow. "I'll be ready," she said through clenched teeth. "I'll hold a rifle if I have to. You won't be able to aim. Doesn't mean I can't shoot. You'd miss." She gave him a look. "Not if they're close." He nodded once, then stood. He carried a stack of firewood inside, then 3 buckets of water from the melting pot outside. If they lit the roof, he needed to be ready. He barricaded the door with a thick beam, leaving just enough room for a rifle barrel. Windows were covered, but he left one shutter loose for a quick exit. The girls watched his movements in silence, their eyes too old for their faces. By the time the moon crested the trees, the house was sealed tight and glowing low with firelight. So sat near the door, cleaning his sidearm, counting bullets. 7 notches. 1 man for each. He had 6 rounds in the cylinder and 8 more loose. That would have to be enough. Outside, the night breathed deep and wide. A coyote howled far off, answered by another, then silence. Tso's fingers flexed. His back itched with old tension. "They're coming," Ayoka said softly. Tso stood. "Stay here." He opened the door just wide enough to slip out, closing it behind him without a sound. The cold wrapped around him like a second coat, numbing his hands, sharpening his ears. He crouched by the side of the Hogan rifle, up, eyes scanning. Then he saw the first flicker of movement, just a shadow crossing the snow to the east. Then another to the west. One near the barn. One crouched low near the root cellar. 7. Just like she said. Each carried a torch or a rifle, some both. They moved like they'd done this before. So waited until the first torch came close enough to cast orange light across the snow. Then he fired. The torch dropped the man with it, shouting, movement. Gunfire cracked from the trees. Tiso ducked behind the woodpile, reloaded fast, aimed again. Another man down. A third returned fire bullet, ripping splinters from the Hogan wall behind him. Inside, he heard Nalina shout, then the crack of her rifle, ragged but loud. Tso moved fast, circling to the back of the house. Someone had reached the barn. Flames lit up the dark. Hope screamed once, then went silent. Tso charged, caught the man with his rifle raised, and tackled him hard into the snow. They rolled fists flying until Tso shoved the muzzle of his revolver under the man's chin and pulled the trigger. He stood panting, ears, wringing sweat, freezing to his skin. 3 down. The barn was burning. The others were regrouping. He had minutes, maybe less. Then a voice called out through the trees. "You can't hold out all night, Yazzie. Come out and we'll let the girls live." Tso aimed and fired into the dark, no response but a curse and retreating steps. Inside the Hogan, more shots cracked. Nalina was still fighting. So crouched low, moved back toward the door, smoke curling into the sky behind him. His world narrowed to one goal: keep the fire from touching the ones inside. Blood doesn't scare me anymore. Not when I've already buried everything I loved. Smoke clung to the roof beams of the hogan, thick as breath in winter. The fire outside crackled louder than it should have, louder than wind or hoof or shot. The barn was a bright wound in the dark flames, licking upward in spirals, spitting sparks into the trees like fireflies born mean. Inside, the heat pressed against the walls, warming the wood from the outside in warning of what might come next. So stood just inside the door, rifle still warm in his hands, his heart beating like a hammer on steel. He counted 4 bodies in the snow, 3 more unaccounted for. They hadn't tried a second charge, not yet. They were regrouping, waiting for the flames to finish what bullets couldn't. Nalina coughed again, deep and hoarse, and blood speckled her lips. She sat slumped against the cot, one hand gripping a rifle too long for her lap. Her skin was pale, her breath short, but her jaw stayed clenched like a stone. "Water," she rasped. Sani ran to the kettle and poured a half cup. It steamed weakly, and the tin trembled in her hands. She brought it to her mother, then knelt at her side. "You shouldn't be up," Sani said. "I should be dead," Nalina replied, and drank. Ahyoka hadn't moved. She sat by the hearth, arms around her knees, eyes on the fire. Her face was calm, but her fingers tapped out a rhythm on the floor, steady and slow. So recognized it now. It wasn't fear. It was waiting. He turned back to the door, cracked it open. Smoke curled in. The wind had shifted again eastward. If the flames caught the roof, the whole hogan would go, and they'd burn inside like kindling. He closed the door and locked the bar. "We have to move." Nalina didn't argue. Cellar too shallow, no back door. She nodded, eyes narrowing as she thought. The old well behind the slope. That's 100 yards in the open. They won't expect it. Maybe. Or maybe they're just letting us cook. Sani stepped forward. "We can crawl low past the sagebrush. I used to do it with Papa, play acting like soldiers." Notso said quickly. "Not all of you." "I'll draw them," Nalina said. "No, you said it yourself. I won't make it much longer. And I won't be used to trap you." So crouched beside her. "I'm not leaving anyone behind. You might not get a choice." They stared at each other for a long moment. Not as enemies. Not even as strangers anymore. Just 2 people tied by the same frayed cord of loss. Then Nalina smiled faintly. "Blood doesn't scare me anymore. Not when I've already buried everything I loved." So's jaw clenched. He looked at the girls. They were silent, still watching him. "I'll go first," he said. "Draw their eyes. When I fire twice, you come fast. Stay low." He took one of the oil-soaked rags from the lamp pile, tied it around his arm, slipped a second revolver into his belt, and tucked a flask of water beneath his coat. Before he opened the door, he knelt beside Ahyoka. "You still see them?" She nodded. "Where?" She pointed east toward the rocks above the barn. 2 up high, 1 in the trees. He nodded, then opened the door and stepped into the night. The cold hit like a slap. The fire behind him flared again, and the barn let out a groan like a dying beast. So ran low across the snow, angling wide from the main trail, using the edge of the trees for cover. His boots crunched, but the wind masked the worst of the sound. He reached a fallen log and crouched. A figure moved above, just as Ahyoka had said. Rifle slung, watching the wrong direction. So raised his revolver and fired once. The man dropped hard and fast. A shout came from the trees. So didn't wait. He fired again into the air, loud and sharp, and began running back, looping to the far side of the clearing. Inside the hogan, Sani pulled Nalina's arm over her shoulder. "Come on, Mama, I'm slowing you. You said you wouldn't be used. So don't start now." Ayoka led the way, crawling under the shutter out the side So had cleared. The snow had turned to crust, quiet under careful feet. They moved fast, keeping low. Ayoka reached the edge of the old well, first a stone circle half buried in drifts. She waved. So saw them from the tree line. Relief hit him like a blow. He ran again past the smoke and the blood-dark shapes. Bullets cracked through the branches. One hit a tree beside him, spitting bark into his face. He slid into the clearing just as the last girl pulled Nalina into the well's shadow. "All here," he gasped. Ayoka nodded. He turned, fired toward the tree line, then ducked low. "We hold here." The well wall rose barely to their shoulders, but it gave them cover. The snowbank helped. Flames from the barn cast wild shadows, confusing dancing, making it hard to see exactly who was where. "They'll come again," So said. "Then we make it hurt," Nalina whispered. Her hands were red now, wrapped around the rifle like a prayer. Sani loaded fresh rounds from So's pouch, her face set like stone. The moon rode high, fat and white over the mountains. Tiso peeked from the edge of the stone well just long enough to catch movement again. 3 shapes now pushing forward. Careful, slow. One carried a torch. Another held a rope. No more shouting. Just silence and heat and death in the dark. So fired first, clipped the torch carrier. The flame fell into snow and hissed out. The other 2 fired wildly in response, bullets cracking through branches. He ducked back, heart thudding. Nalina took the next shot, steady, almost graceful. Her bullet found its mark. A man fell with a cry that turned to a gurgle. Sani was shaking now, but she didn't run. Ayoka turned to Tso. "There's one more. Where behind us?" Tso's blood ran cold. He turned. A shape loomed at the edge of the trees behind the well, rifle raised. Before Tso could fire, the rifle cracked. The shape dropped. Behind it stood Benail the blacksmith holding a smoking shotgun. "Thought I smelled cowards," he muttered, stepping forward. "You all right?" Tso stared at him. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Same thing as you," Benail said. "Making sure Cutter doesn't sleep easy." He tossed a satchel of cartridges onto the ground. "Time to finish this." The fire behind them roared louder, but none of them flinched. Not anymore. "I'm not here to take sides," Sheriff Hale said. "But a man bleeding in the dirt ain't a side I want to be on." Snow covered most of the blood, but not all of it. Pale crimson streaked the edge of the well, thin and smeared like someone had tried to scrub it away with prayer. The fire had finally died down, leaving the blackened bones of the barn curling with smoke. The sun, weak and yellow, barely crested the ridge, mourning in name only. So stood at the edge of the clearing. Arms folded, rifle slung across his back. His coat was singed along one side and he hadn't slept. The adrenaline had burned off hours ago, leaving behind only cold limbs and a sharper clarity than he liked. Benali was gutting one of the dead horses behind the hogan, keeping the meat and tossing the rest. He whistled while he worked the sound low and easy like it was any other morning. Inside the house, Nalina slept. Sani curled beside her like a guard dog refusing to leave her mother's side. Ayoka hadn't spoken since dawn. So heard the riders before he saw them, 4 men's slow hoofbeats approaching from the southern trail. One wore a long coat and a wide badge on his chest. The others rode behind rifles holstered, but hands near ready. So stepped out to meet them, boots crunching on frost. The man in front pulled up short. Sheriff Hale looked tired. His beard had more gray in it than last time So saw him 5 years back, maybe 6, during a land dispute near Canyon de Chelly. Back then, Hale had been sharp. Now his eyes carried the weight of too many silences. Yazzie Hale said, nodding. Hale. He glanced past him at the ruined barn. Heard there was trouble. There was. Looks like it bled. So didn't respond. The sheriff sighed and dismounted, boots sinking into the half-frozen dirt. I don't want this, he said plainly. Don't need it. There's law to keep. But I've got 10 deputies and a jail that leaks when it rains. You want me to pick fights with Cutter's boys, I'll need more than bullets. Tissot held up the journal. This still your handwriting? Hale hesitated, then nodded slowly. Some of it. Then you know what's in it. I know it got Chuli killed. And how long did you plan on staying quiet? Hale looked past him again toward the smoke. His voice dropped. I was trying to stay alive, same as you. Notso said. I came back. The wind picked up, sending ashes skittering across the clearing. I'm not here to take sides, Hale muttered. But a man bleeding in the dirt ain't a side I want to be on. You already picked a side when you let Cutter run your town. He runs the bank. He runs everything. Hale didn't argue. Benally emerged from behind the hogan, wiping his hands on a cloth. Morning, Sheriff. Blacksmith. Want some horse meat? Not hungry. Benally grinned. Thought not. One of the deputies stepped forward. You plan on arresting anyone? Sheriff Hale looked between Tso Benally, the ruined homestead, and the sky. Then he shook his head. Not yet. Tso handed over the journal. You want this buried, say so now, he said. But if you do, the next time Cutter sends men, I won't be the only one dying here. Hale took the book, turned a few pages. When he got to the list of names, he closed it. I'll take this to Santa Fe. Alone. No, he said. Redbird's coming with me. That caught Tso off guard. He showed up this morning, Hale added. Said it's gone far enough. He's ready to speak. About time. He's scared. So is everyone. Hale nodded. But he's still walking. That counts. Tso watched him mount again. I'll ride with you part way, he said. No need. It's not for you. Behind them, Nalina had come to the door wrapped in a blanket. Her face was drawn, but her eyes still burned. You're going to leave us here, she asked. Hale turned in the saddle. You want me to stay? I want protection. Real protection. He glanced at Tso. She's not wrong, Tso said. Cutter's still out there. This isn't finished. I'll send word to the marshals, Hale said. But it'll take time. Then we hold until they get here. The sheriff gave a long look around. You know what you're asking for. Tso nodded. A stand. Hale looked down at the journal in his hands. One man can't hold a valley. Then it's a good thing there's more than one of us. Hale didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. He rode off slowly, his men following behind. When they disappeared into the trees, Tso turned back toward the hogan. Benally fell into step beside him. You sure about this? Notso said. But I'm tired of running. You've said that before. Still true. Inside, Ahyoka stood by the hearth, her hand pressed flat to the wall. She looked up as he entered. They're not done, she whispered. I know. More are coming. How many? She closed her eyes. Too many, she whispered. So took off his coat and sat beside the fire. Then we dig in, he said, and we make it cost them. Benally leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like a man watching his forge heat up for a long war. Ahyoka came and sat beside Tso, her shoulder resting against his. He didn't move. He just watched the fire and let the silence grow heavy again, knowing it wouldn't last. I've built things my whole life, but never thought I'd have to build a war. Benally spat into the snow, then leaned back from the post he was driving into the frozen ground. His hands were cracked, bleeding around the knuckles, wrapped in rags that no longer resembled gloves. He was halfway through building the third barricade, this one just north of the hogan, where the trees thinned and the land opened into a narrow ridge. If Cutter came again, it'd be from that side. Tizo stood a few yards away, watching him work. He'd spent the morning laying wire between the remaining fence posts and scattering shards of broken glass around the barn's remains. They had no mines, no real defenses, just makeshift traps and old war tricks from younger, uglier days. But even a poor trap was still better than nothing. "We'll need to pull the last boards from the smokehouse," Tso said. "Reinforce the western flank." "Smokehouse won't do us much good without a roof," Benail replied. "And the only thing we're smoking now is gunpowder." They shared a tired laugh. The morning sun barely touched the frost on the grass. They hadn't seen any of Cutter's men since the attack, but that only made the quiet worse. You could plan around noise. Silence crept in, made you question every shadow. Behind them, Nelina was teaching the girls how to refill the oil lamps and fold spare clothes into sacks ready to move if they had to. Her strength was coming back in fits and starts. The cough still rattled her, but she stood without help now and carried herself like she had something left to lose. Ayoka had stopped talking in riddles. She sat on the porch every morning before dawn and watched the trees silent. Sani stayed close to her mother, one hand always within reach of a rifle. "They're not scared anymore," Tso said. Benaili didn't look up. "They should be. They're past that. Too young for it." "Maybe. But they've seen the worst." Benaili straightened and cracked his back. "No. Not yet they haven't." Tso didn't answer. Inside the hogan, the fire burned low. Marta had arrived late the night before, dragging a small wagon with dry goods and kerosene. She hadn't said much, just unloaded, nodded at Nelina, and gone back the way she came before sunrise. That made 3 people from town who'd chosen a side. Quiet folks. Ordinary. The kind you never noticed until they stood between you and a bullet. "We won't have enough ammunition for a second siege," Benaili said. "Then we end it before they can regroup." Benaili raised an eyebrow. "You thinking what I'm thinking? We take it to them. Risky. Everything is." Benaili scratched his beard. "You still got that journal?" So nodded. "Safe. Then let's hit them where it hurts." The plan wasn't complicated, just desperate. Cutter operated from the bank in town, but the real rot was in the back office where the ledgers were kept, where the forged deeds lived. The journal laid it out, clear land transfers filed under ghost names, backed by bribes masked by scripture. If they could get to those documents, make copies, or steal them outright, they'd have something solid to take to the marshals. But getting in meant slipping past Cutter's guards and whoever else he'd bought. And if it went wrong, it meant dying fast, or worse, slow. "I'll go alone," Tso said. Benaili shook his head. "Hell you will. You're needed here. So are you. I've been in places like that before. I've seen your scars. I can move quieter. I'm louder, meaner, and better looking. And you're not talking me out of it." Tso gave a weary smile. "Fine. But if one of us doesn't make it," Benail cut him off, "then the other one better damn well finish the job." They prepared after dark. Ayoka handed them both small cloth bundles. Inside were smooth stones painted with symbols simple but precise. A spiral, a crescent, a cross of 4 directions. "For luck?" Tso asked. "No," she said. "For balance." Sani handed over a wrapped bundle of jerky and flatbread. "Mama said to tell you not to be stupid." "Tell her I said it's too late for that," Benaili muttered. The girls didn't cry. They didn't hold on or beg or panic. They just stood at the door watching the way you watched men ride off to do something you couldn't understand, but knew mattered. So gripped Nelina's arm before they left. "You'll be all right. I survived worse than Cutter." He looked at her. "Did you?" She paused. No, but I'm not the same woman anymore either. They left under cover of stars, the moon barely a sliver now. So led them through the back trails, avoiding the main roads, skirting the edge of dry creeks and stunted cottonwoods. They reached the edge of Fort Defiance just after midnight. The town slept, mostly. The bank sat at the center like a tomb. No lights, no sounds, but someone was watching. There was always someone. So motioned toward the rear alley. They circled around, staying low boots, silent on hard earth. Benail picked the back lock with a sliver of wire and a prayer. It clicked open. They slipped inside. The office was colder than the outside. Inside, it smelled like dust, ink, and rotting power. They moved fast. So knew what to look for: the bottom drawer, third cabinet, locked chest with Cutter's personal seal. He smashed the lock with the butt of his pistol and opened it. Inside, maps, deeds, signatures that didn't match. A gold pen. A sealed envelope marked confidential. So grabbed them all. Then a floorboard creaked. They froze. A man stepped into the hallway, half-dressed, hair-wild, pistol in hand. Cutter. What the hell? Benail shot first. Cutter dropped, clutching his arm. Screamed. Fired wildly. Missed. So dragged the documents into a bag and ran. Benail kicked the door open. Gunfire behind them. A shout from down the street. A bell clanged. They ran through the alley, climbed the back wall of the general store, dropped down into snow. Hoofbeats in the distance. They didn't stop running until the trees swallowed them whole again. Back at the ridge, the fire was lit in the hearth, and the girls were waiting. So handed the satchel to Nelina. Proof, he said, breathless. Names, deeds, all of it. Benail dropped to the floor and wheezed. I've built things my whole life, he panted, but never thought I'd have to build a war. Nelina didn't smile, but she lit the lamp brighter, and they all sat in silence, waiting for the knock that would come too soon. Justice don't ride a white horse. Sometimes it limps in covered in dust, and it don't smell like grace. Redbird stood at the edge of the Hogan's porch, clutching his hat with both hands, like it might fly away if he didn't. He wasn't a tall man, nor strong-looking, but he had the kind of face that belonged to someone who'd seen too much and said too little. The girls stared at him through the window, uncertain. Nelina leaned against the doorframe, her breath tight in her chest, but her spine straight. So emerged from the side, brushing soot from his coat. The raid on the bank had left a bruise on his shoulder and a scrape down one cheek, but nothing that hadn't bled before. You sure you want to do this? He asked Redbird. I'm not, Redbird said, but I'm more sure I don't want to die with my mouth shut. Benail stepped out behind him, chewing a sliver of jerky. Then we better get you seen. No use risking your neck if nobody hears the noose swing. They headed for the church. Fort Defiance was quiet again, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. Thick with tension, the kind that lived in the space between thunder and lightning. News had traveled fast. Cutter was still alive but holed up in the bank with a shattered shoulder. Half his men scattered, the other half mad and looking for a reason. Redbird had agreed to speak publicly in front of the town. Marta had arranged it. Said she'd pull in a few townsfolk, set the place, and light the fuse. I'll say what I know, Redbird said as they walked, but don't expect applause. We don't need applause, So said. Just the truth. The chapel doors were open, the pews half full. People who hadn't looked So in the eye for years now sat upright, and still coats in their laps, hats held tight. Marta stood near the front with her arms crossed. She didn't smile. Tizo walked Redbird to the front and helped him step up onto the low platform behind the altar. Redbird's hands trembled. His lips moved once, no sound, then again. "I ain't a speaker," he began, "but I worked for Cutter, drove wagons, hauled crates, moved paper when he told me to." The crowd shifted. I never asked what was in those crates, but I knew, everyone knew, bribes, whiskey, guns, some of them headed for Arizona, some for the reservation border. I never saw them open, but I heard what came back. He looked down, twisting his hat. When Chuli started asking questions, Cutter told me to scare him off, said send a message. I slashed the tires on his cart, burned his barn. Next week, Chuli went missing. Someone in the back gasped. "I didn't kill him," Redbird said, voice cracking, "but I helped them find him, and I knew what they meant to do. I didn't stop it." Benali crossed his arms. Tizo watched the faces in the crowd. Some leaned forward, others sat stiff, already forming their doubts. Redbird continued. "There's a ledger with names. The deeds Cutter forged. The land he stole in God's name. Marta's seen it. So has Sheriff Hale. You want proof, it's there." He stepped back, voice ragged, eyes down. So took his place. "I know most of you don't trust me. I wouldn't either. I've been gone. I left this place because I thought it had nothing left to fight for. I was wrong." He held up the satchel. "Inside here is everything Cutter's done to this valley. The land theft, the bribery, the killings. If we let it slide, we're no better." Someone called from the back. "And what do you want us to do, march into the bank with sticks?" No Tso said, "I want you to stand up, speak out. When the marshals come, they'll need more than one man's word. They'll need yours." Silence. Then Marta stepped forward. "I'll sign." A pause. Then another voice. "An old rancher." "Me too." Redbird looked up, stunned. Why, the rancher shrugged. "Because justice don't ride a white horse. Sometimes it limps in covered in dust and it don't smell like grace." That broke the tension. People stood. Not all, but enough. Enough to matter. Outside the church, the air had shifted. Not lighter, not yet. But the fear wasn't holding quite so tight. So walked Redbird back to the edge of town. "You did good. I just told what I should have said years ago. That's more than most." Redbird turned to go, but stopped. "You think Cutter'll come again? He's hurt, but he's not finished. He'll burn the valley down before he lets it go." Tiso nodded. "Then we better be ready." Back at the Hogan, the girls had packed bags. Nalina sat by the fire, a map spread across her lap. "You think it worked?" she asked. "For now," Tiso said. "We won't hold them off with signed papers." "No," he agreed. "But we might with enough people who remember what it means to be free." Benail sat sharpening his blade. "Freedom's only free if you're ready to bleed for it." So looked around the room at Ayoka's calm face, Sani's watchful eyes, Nalina's fire that refused to die. He checked the rifle by the door. They hadn't won yet. But for the first time in years, the town had stopped whispering. "You want peace, earn it with scars." The wind howled down the gorge like it was carrying warnings in a dead tongue. It kicked dust across the high road, whipped dry leaves off the pines, and hissed through the crags above Fort Defiance. So stood with one boot propped on a stone eyes on the trail that wound through the valley. No movement yet. Just the cold and the echo of everything that hadn't happened yet. Behind him, the others waited. Benali adjusted the strap on his rifle and muttered curses about the way the wind bit through his coat. Sani sat beside her mother, head down loading cartridges into a battered wooden box. Nalina didn't speak. Her hand rested gently on the girl's shoulder, her face like a cliff carved by time and fire. They'd moved camp up into the ridge above the homestead. The Hogan was too exposed now, too easy to torch again. Up here they had angles, high ground, places to fall back. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ayoka sat apart from them, legs crossed, her shawl pulled tight. She'd drawn symbols in the dust with the stub of charcoal circles, arrows, animals with no names. She said nothing since sunrise. Just drew. Waited. So looked over the edge again. Still no riders, still no smoke. But something in the wind said soon. He turned to the others. We hold the ridge. They won't flank from the canyon, it's too narrow. They'll try from the open west side. That's where we'll dig in, Benail snorted. I'll take the left edge. Least if I die, I'll see it coming. Set your traps near the deadfall. Use the wire. Sani, stay near your mother. If she says run, you run. Sani glanced up, and if she can't run, so paused. Then you carry her. Nalina's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. They moved like ghosts, every step rehearsed in their minds 100 times. The traps were crude pits, tripwires, sharpened stakes buried under brush, but they'd do enough to slow men who thought themselves gods. By midday, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the mesa in cruel gold. The kind of light that makes everything sharper, more dangerous. It lit the distant road like a torch. And then finally, they came. Riders. 9 of them. Cutter's men. They didn't bother hiding, didn't bother rushing. Just rolled in slow, confident, with their rifles raised and their coats billowing, like they were just coming to collect a debt. So crouched low behind a fallen cedar, sighting down his barrel. He breathed in, slow, long. His thumb rested on the hammer. Benali was to his left, eyes narrow, not moving, a stone statue with a trigger. The riders spread out as if they sensed the danger but couldn't name it yet. 2 men dismounted, walking their horses slowly along the trail, rifles ready. A bird cried above the cliffs, shrill and sudden. Then Tso fired. The first rider dropped hard, hit before the sound caught up. The second flinched, then crumpled to a shot from Benail's ridge. Chaos followed. The rest of the men scrambled for cover, returning fire wild and wide. Bullets cracked through branches, kicked up dust and bark. Tso moved. Rolled to a second position. Fired again. Screams now. 1 man caught in the leg. Another stumbled into a pit trap, screaming as the spikes met him. The others began to panic. But then came the voice. Cutter. He wasn't riding. He walked behind them, arm in a sling coat stained from his last wound, face pale but burning with rage. Hold your ground, he bellowed. They're just ghosts, just dirt and fear. So watched him through the scope, and for a moment he remembered standing in a different war, in a different land, where another man had shouted similar lies to boys too green to know better. He fired again. The bullet hit the dirt near Cutter's boot, close enough to send a message. Cutter stopped. He scanned the ridge. I know who you are, Yazzie, he shouted, and I know what you're protecting. But that land doesn't belong to you. Tso didn't answer. Cutter stepped forward. You think these people will thank you. You think they'll remember you after you're gone. Still no reply. Come down, Cutter roared. Come down and fight me like a man. Tso rose from the rocks. I already am. The gunfire paused. Cutter squinted. You really think you can change anything, he said. They'll rebuild the bank. The ledgers will burn. The names will fade. And you'll be nothing. Tso stepped forward. Maybe. But you'll be dead. Then Sani's rifle cracked. The shot missed, but it spooked Cutter's horse. The animal reared, crashing into one of the riders beside him. That was all it took. The hill exploded again with gunfire. 2 more of Cutter's men went down. The rest turned to flee, panic setting in. Tso aimed and dropped another as he tried to mount. Cutter ducked behind a boulder, panting. one hand pressed to his shoulder. From the corner of his eye, So saw Benele stand rifle pointed. "Got the bastard in my sights," he muttered. "Not yet," So said. "Let him crawl." Benele blinked. "You serious? Let him feel it?" Cutter crawled through the dirt like a dying snake face, pale blood dripping from his sleeve. He called for help. No one answered. By the time he reached the bottom of the slope, he was alone. So lowered his rifle. They didn't cheer. Didn't celebrate. Just waited in silence. The wind picked up again, colder now. Ayoka finally spoke, her voice quiet. "He's not the end. Just the last shadow of something rotten." So looked at her. "Then we burn it out." Behind them, Nalina stood tall, her coat flapping in the wind, her rifle cradled like a warning. "We want peace," she said. "Earn it with scars." No one argued. They had bled for this land, and now maybe it would hold them. Some scars ain't made to fade. They're there so you remember who you were before you bled. The valley smelled like smoke and sage. Burnt cedar lingered in the air where the fire had touched the edge of the forest, snuffed now, leaving behind only blackened trunks and curling embers. The sun sat low on the horizon, bruised orange and swollen from the dust. It cast long shadows across the ridge where Tso stood watching the trail Cutter had crawled down just hours ago. Cutter hadn't died on that slope. That part was still unfinished. He'd escaped into the rocks during the chaos, leaving 3 dead men behind and 2 more too gut-shot to ride. The town wasn't celebrating, not yet, because a wounded snake was still a snake, and everyone knew a final strike might come when you least expected. So didn't trust the silence that had followed. It felt like a held breath, like a prayer waiting for the wrong answer. He descended the ridge slowly, his limbs heavy from the long night. Every step reminded him of old wounds, shattered ribs from the war, the slice across his side that Cutter's men had given him years back, the ache in his knee from falling off his horse during a thunderstorm in a canyon outside Chinle. But today's pain was different. Today the weight settled in his chest, slow and quiet. The kind of pain that doesn't limp. It lingers. The camp had moved back to the homestead. What was left of it? They'd rebuilt part of the porch and cleared the charred remains of the barn. Benele had set up a forge against the east wall and was hammering out new nails by firelight, working with the tired rhythm of a man who knew this wasn't about speed, it was about finishing. Inside, Nalina sat by the hearth, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her wound had opened again during the firefight. Blood had soaked through her shirt by the time Sani helped her down from the ridge. She hadn't spoken since. "She needs a doctor," Ayoka said quietly. "We don't have one," So replied. "We have you." He looked at her, unsure how to answer that. Ayoka stepped closer. "You know how to stitch pain shut. That's what you've been doing since the day you came back." He knelt beside Nalina and peeled back the fabric. The gash across her ribs looked angry, swollen and pink-edged. Infection had started its slow work. He cleaned it with whiskey. She didn't even flinch. "You're going to live," he said softly. She blinked, then gave a brittle smile. That wasn't the question. What was it then? Was it worth it? He didn't answer. Benele came in from the cold dust on his boots and sweat on his brow. "The traps are reset. If Cutter comes back, he'll bleed for every step. He won't come alone," So said. "No," Benele replied, "but maybe he'll come scared." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. 3 riders approached from the east trail, slow, tired horses, dust-stained coats, federal stars glinting on their chests. Marshals. So stepped outside, his rifle across his back hands down at his sides. The lead marshal dismounted, removing his hat. Yazzie, I'm him. Name's Marshall Wynne. Santa Fe sent us. You got Hale's letter, his in the journal, and a town full of folks saying the same thing. Wynne glanced past him at the wreckage of the barn, the makeshift defenses, the people moving like ghosts across the property. Place looks like a battlefield. It was. Wynne nodded. Where's Cutter gone? But not far. Wynne looked to his men. We'll find him. One way or another. So didn't nod. He just stepped aside to let them pass. Inside, the marshals spoke with Nelena, listened to Sani, took down names, sketched maps, checked documents. Wynne studied Cutter's ledgers with a soldier's eyes, noting patterns, names, dollar signs, property lines that weren't just stolen, but erased from memory. When he was done, he closed the book gently and looked at So. This isn't just corruption, he said. It's treason. I know. You got any idea how deep this goes? Deep enough to swallow good men whole. Wynne rubbed his jaw. We'll bring charges. Cut the head off this thing. But that doesn't mean peace. Tiso looked toward the ridge. I stopped looking for peace. What are you looking for then? Enough room to breathe. Wynne stood. We'll set up camp in town. Keep patrols along the ridge. If Cutter shows, we'll hang him. If not, we'll drag him from wherever he's hiding. So followed them out to the porch. The sun had dipped behind the hills. Coyotes howled somewhere far off, not near enough to threaten, but close enough to remind everyone what still lurked. Benele handed So a cup of strong coffee. You believe them? No, me neither. But I believe in what we've done. Benele took a sip. You know what this means, don't you? The fight's only going to get more clever. Less guns, more paper. I can read, So said. Benele grinned. Can't write, though. Good thing you're still around. They stood side by side, shoulders brushing, watching the marshals fade into the dusk. Ayoka stepped out, standing between them. It's not over. No, So said, but it's quieter. Behind them, Nelena coughed, weak but awake. Sani lit a new lamp, the flame steady. The wind picked up again, carrying dust and ash across the porch. So closed his eyes for a second. Some scars ain't made to fade, he said under his breath. They're there so you remember who you were before you bled. Benele looked sideways at him. And who are you now? So exhaled. Someone who stayed. Sometimes all a child needs to heal is to see someone refuse to leave. Snow fell gently, soft as ash, brushing the rooftops of Fort Defiance with a kind of fragile peace. It wasn't heavy, just enough to cover the ugly parts, the charred ruins, the blood-dark earth near the ridge where men had died. The land held its breath, as though daring anyone to wake it again. Inside the homestead, the fire crackled low. Sani curled against her mother's side, asleep beneath a quilt stitched with horses and stars. Nelena's hand rested on her daughter's back, her body thin but no longer trembling. She was healing day by day, though the coughing still came in waves, and her strength hadn't fully returned. She smiled more now, with her eyes as well as her mouth. Ayoka stirred a pot of corn stew over the hearth, humming softly. The melody was old, older than the town, older than borders, something her grandmother once sang when storms rolled in. So sat on the porch coat, wrapped tight, a tin cup of bitter coffee steaming in his hands. The valley stretched before him, white with frost, and still scarred by the footprints of those who had fled or fallen. But no riders approached, no dogs barked. Only the wind moved, whispering in a voice he could almost understand. He heard boots behind him. Benele stepped out, lighting a cigar with a long match. You always this quiet after a fight? I've got nothing left to say, So replied. Then you're finally becoming a wise man. They shared a silence that didn't ask for words. From the trail came the faint sound of hooves, slow, careful, like someone trying not to disturb the dead. So stood, hand on the butt of his pistol, but didn't draw. Marshal Wynne rode into view, bundled in a thick coat, a folder under one arm. He dismounted stiffly and handed it over. "Arrest warrant," he said. "For Abraham Cutter. Fraud, bribery, attempted murder conspiracy against the territorial government. It's official." So didn't take the folder, just looked at it. He's still missing, last report had him heading south. May have slipped into Mexico. Could be halfway to Durango by now. Benale muttered, "Cowards never die where you want them to." Wynne didn't argue. "We'll keep searching," he said. "But I didn't come for that. I came because the governor's office needs a local liaison. Someone who understands this land, these people. Someone they can't ignore." He held out a second envelope. So eyed it. "You offering me a job, I'm offering you a choice." So took the envelope, but didn't open it. "I didn't do this to become something." "I know," Wynne said. "But maybe that's exactly why you should." He turned and left without waiting for an answer. So stood in the doorway for a long while, envelope in hand, steam from the coffee rising in slow curls beside him. Inside, Sonny stirred. She blinked at him through the window and waved. He raised the cup in greeting. Later that evening, after the stew and the bread, when the fire burned low and Sonny had drifted back to sleep, Nalina beckoned him to sit near her. "She keeps her shoes by the door now," she said, voice low, "just in case we have to run." So looked down at the worn leather boots, set neatly side by side beside the woodpile. "I used to do that too," he said. "For years. Always kept a bag packed even when I told myself I wasn't leaving." "She's young," Nalina said. "But she remembers more than she says. She wakes at night, checks the windows. Every sound, every wind gust, she flinches. She'll grow out of it." Nalina shook her head. "No. She'll grow through it. That's different." He said nothing for a while, then added, "She's strong. She's strong because she's watching you. You think you came back here just to settle a score, but that little girl, she sees the man who stayed when it got ugly. That's how she'll know love isn't just something people say. It's what they prove." She coughed, wincing, but waved him off when he moved to help. "She'll heal," she whispered, "because she saw you stay." So reached into his coat, pulled out the envelope Wynne had given him, and placed it beside the lamp. "I don't want to be part of their machine." "You won't be," Nalina said. "You'll be the wrench in it, the one who keeps it honest." He met her eyes. "You want me to go?" She smiled faintly. "I want you to be what she thinks you are." He looked at Sonny, sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. Ahyoka returned from the porch, brushing snow from her shoulders. "Sky's clearing," she said. "Stars are out." Benali leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the fire. "She'll make a fine leader," he said, nodding at Nalina. "That girl of hers, too. One day." "She already is," Ahyoka murmured. So stood and walked outside again. The snow had stopped. The wind had settled. The stars were sharp above him, cold and bright. He walked to the ridge where so much blood had been spilled and sat in the dirt. No rifle, no armor. Just him. And the silence? After a while, he felt small footsteps crunch behind him. Sonny appeared wrapped in a blanket, barefoot despite the cold. She sat beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. "You still here?" she asked. "I'm still here." She looked up at him. "Promise," he nodded. "Promise." They watched the stars together, not speaking. She leaned her head on his arm, and for the first time in years, He let himself believe that maybe staying was the bravest thing he'd ever done.